part 3 of chapter 18. This is going to talk about our autoimmunity, graft rejection, immunodeficiencies, and cancer. So, first off, we have autoimmune diseases, right? Also called autoimmunity, auto referring to self, right? Oops, excuse me. And like an autobiography, right? You write about yourself. In normal, healthy states, the immune system induces tolerance. So we want to know the word tolerance as the ability that your immune cells have to leave your own cells alone, right? You do not react to your own antigens. So tolerance is a lack of anti-self immune response, right? You do not want to respond to a self antigen. However, right, autoimmunity, something went wrong and there's a loss of that tolerance, and then there's mechanisms responsible for different diseases. So type 2, type 3, and type 4 hypersensitivities also can be called autoimmune diseases. There's different ones, and each one has their own sort of symptom and cause. And we're going to talk about these down here: Graves' disease, myasthenia gravis, diabetes type 1, and multiple sclerosis. How people become immunodeficient, have autoimmunity, right? Have an autoimmune disorder is still up in the air. So there's many factors that lead to this immune response to yourself. So you can see that there's a lot, right? There's chronic infections that you have, maybe your gut. And this is mostly for Crohn's disease, or the gluten intolerance, where they think that your immune system in your gut kind of fights off gluten as if it were a pathogen. Nutrient deficiencies, insulin surges, toxins, chemicals, adrenal fatigue, food sensitivities, estrogen dominance. And then there's also just like the genetic basis, right? Some people have the genetics to have autoimmune diseases in their family, but not always. All right, so the first autoimmune disease is Graves' disease. And this is simply where antibodies are going to bind to receptors on your thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland is stimulated then to produce thyroid hormone. So normally, okay, so this is a little bit of physiology, there's a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone, and this is the normal hormone, this blue guy, that travels in your bloodstream, and when it binds to the receptor, it causes your thyroid to make thyroid hormone. Abnormally, your body has made antibodies to this receptor. They just sit there, right? So the receptor is completely always bound by this mistaken antibody, and it tells the thyroid, make thyroid hormone, make thyroid hormone, make thyroid hormone, right? So your thyroid gland, this guy looks pretty tired, is constantly stimulated to make more thyroid hormone, but this is due to the fact that there's an antibody there instead of the actual stimulating hormone that should be there. So what happens in Graves' disease is because your thyroid gland, it sits in your neck, sort of above the larynx or voice box region. It can enlarge. All right, this is the sign of an enlarged thyroid. This is called a goiter. A goiter is a symptom of Graves' disease because it tells you that your thyroid is overstimulated and it's growing larger to keep up with the demand for thyroid hormone. And so that will go away with treatment. And then exophthalmia, which is increased pressure in the eye and the eyes tend to bulge out, is also a sign of Graves' disease. Unfortunately, this does not go back, but you can stop it from progressing. All right, so the next one is called myasthenia gravis, or gravis. I keep saying gravis, it's gravis. And what happens here, right, so this is again a little bit of physiology or anatomy, where we have a communication between a nerve cell and we have the muscle cell. And normally we have the neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. It's released, and then there are acetylcholine receptors on the muscle, and then acetylcholine tells the muscle it's time to contract. In the myasthenia gravis, the nerve cell releases acetylcholine, but the acetylcholine is blocked by the antibodies binding to those receptors. In this case, it doesn't stimulate the muscle to contract. It's in the way. So these antibodies are blocking the acetylcholine from binding, so the muscle never gets the signal to contract. So we have a muscle that's unable to contract, and so that's called paralysis, right? And so that is what this disorder becomes. It's a disorder of paralyzed muscle. In multiple sclerosis, we have antibodies and T cells working. The antibodies are going to be against the myelin sheath of your nervous system. So a little bit of background, myelin is a fatty substance that wraps around your nerve fiber. So you can see the exposed nerve fiber, just like the wires that power any of your, electronics. They always have that plastic coating, and then inside you have those metal wires. Our immune system is pretty much the same. We have a protective coating, and it allows the sort of action potentials, the nerve signals to travel smoothly and quickly. When you have antibodies attacking it, it'll cause your T cells to come in and basically destroy this myelin. And it can happen anywhere in the body. So it's not, just one nerve that's affected, it's any nerve that's affected. And it really severely compromises the ability of neurons to send their impulses. And this can be any neuron. It can be a sensory neuron, it can be a motor neuron. There's no cure for multiple sclerosis, but there is treatment to slow the progression. And I know a little bit about this. I do have a friend with multiple sclerosis, and I've seen him progress with his disease over the years, where he's now in a wheelchair. But it's been slow. So hopefully, it won't become too much of an issue, or won't progress too much further. This is just an example of multiple sclerosis, and it can affect anywhere in the body. It can affect places in your brain where you can have cognitive or mood symptoms. You can have the optic nerve where you have visual disturbances. If it happens in, the motor control of your tongue or your mouth, your speech can be affected. So any of these, a musculoskeletal, right, muscle weakness. My friend is now in a wheelchair. Sensation, bowel incontinence, urinary. So it just depends on where you have this attack, and they're called flare-ups, right? So you don't have it all the time, but you'll flare up, and then you'll have a specific part of your body that's being affected. So that's multiple sclerosis. And then for type 1 diabetes, so we know there's two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is an autoimmune disorder, and it's usually caught early. So this is also known as like the early onset or childhood diabetes. And basically for diabetes, it is a lack of insulin, right? It's destroying your insulin secreting cells. The organ that makes insulin is the pancreas, and there's specific cells in the pancreas called beta cells that secrete the insulin. And for some reason, the cytotoxic T cells target these guys, right? So they target specifically the beta cells, no other cells, and they're unable to make insulin. So without insulin, glucose, which is our sugar, is not able to enter into many of our cells. So when we eat a meal, right, our digestive system breaks it down. We take all those nutrients, we put it into the bloodstream, and the blood carries it to all of our cells. For many of our cells, for example, our skeletal muscle requires insulin to take in the glucose. It's like a little sign to absorb the glucose. So if glucose is not being able to get across from the bloodstream into your tissues, then it stays in the bloodstream, and it causes something called hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar. And hyperglycemia leads to a lot of problems. We won't cover that, but what can happen is that your body thinks that, we don't have any sugar. Now we need to break down fats. Now we need to break down protein as energy. And it can really produce these chemicals that can cause a coma. And the good news about type 1 diabetes actually is that there's a simple-ish fix. I mean, it's a lifelong disease, and you'll have to take insulin for the rest of your life. So exogenous insulin just means insulin made from outside the body, right? So you get your insulin shots. And that's basically type 1 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes, just FYI, is your body does make insulin, but your body becomes desensitized or insensitive to the insulin you're making. And so it's a little bit more complicated of an issue to fix. Okay, here's graft rejection. So when you get a graft, skin graft, you can get organ transplants are the same kind of thing here. For graft rejection, there's different ways that you can get a graft. Let's say you have a burn, and a pretty bad burn where you need to cover it up with skin, right? So an autograft would be taking some skin from your body somewhere else and putting it on the affected area. A syngraft or a syngenic graft or an isograft, which your book calls an isograft, is where you have an identical twin. So the MHC complex is the same. Lucky you, right? And then you get into allograft and xenograft. So an allograft is just from a non-identical individual. The issue with allografts, right? We want to think about the MHC complex because we know that the T cells recognize MHC. And the allograft, you're going to have a different MHC. So people who get skin grafts or like grafts from someone who's not identical or a different species, right? The MHC is going to be wrong there. That's called a xenograft. You have to worry about graft rejection, right? Your immune system is going to recognize this non-self marker and then start to attack the foreign tissue. So if you were to get a graft, you have to suppress the T cell part of your immune system until, I don't know, until when, but that's up to the doctors, but you do have to suppress. And also for organ transplants, you might have to be on immunosuppressive drugs for life because once your T cells are activated, right, they're going to destroy that foreign tissue. So this is our graft rejection, right? A picture of a skin graft that was performed on a patient. So this is just kind of covering what I just talked about, right? It's a procedure for a skin or organ transplant. The donor and recipient have to have pretty similar MHC type tissues not to be rejected or to minimize rejection. And this is just remembering that your T cells do recognize the MHC, and any foreign MHC would cause your T cells to reject it. MHC can be similar for family members in the same family. The more outside your genetic world, right, the more likely the MHC will be different. And so that's the issue with like organ transplants and tissue transplants, is that we're looking for someone with an MHC that's not going to be so different. Make it a little bit similar to make it a good match. And so again, in immunosuppression, to deal with transplant rejection, recipient's immune system is sometimes suppressed, sometimes for life, right? And I ask you, which arm of the immune system is more important to suppress, the B cells or T cells? And because we're dealing with MHC, right, it's the T cells that are important to suppress. All right, lastly, we're coming up with immune deficiencies. So this is where your immune system is compromised, right? And there's two kinds of immune deficiencies. You're born with one called congenital. Your book calls them primary immune deficiencies, where you're born with an issue, genetic, or maybe you failed to develop a thymus, and your immune system is compromised in some way, right? If you don't have a thymus, then you're not making your T cells. Even though you have your innate immune system and you have your B cells, you still don't have your T cell arm. And remember how T helper cells are really, really important in stimulating all those parts of your immune system. So if you don't have T helper cells, then you're going to be immunosuppressed for all of your immune responses. The most severe kind of immune deficiency is called SCID, which stands for severe combined immunodeficiency. And these are people who are just born without an immune system, like no immune system. And all types of lymphocytes are very, very low. These guys need basically a bone marrow transplant. Remember, bone marrow is where we make all of our blood cells, even the white blood cells, in order to overcome their congenital immune deficiency. And then there's acquired, right? So this is called a secondary immune deficiency, where you're born perfectly normal with a normal immune system, but something suppresses your immune system from in life, right? So Drugs, and this doesn't have to be like recreational drugs, this can be being on steroids, are immunosuppressant. If you're have cancer, you're under chemotherapy for cancer, those are going to hurt your immune system. Some viruses are able to come in and weaken your immune system, specifically HIV, which is called human immunodeficiency virus. It comes in, and HIV specifically attacks T helper cells, CD4 positive cells. So you looked at how T helper cells are so important. If you kill off those helper cells, you really are severely immunocompromised. Some people have their spleen removed, which your spleen is also part of the lymphatic system, and it does contain lymph nodes. I'm sorry, not lymph. It contains lymphocytes. So if you remove that, you can also become immune deficient, and just a poor diet, right, being in poor health can also cause your immune system to not work as well. So you're immune deficient. Oh, and I should also add that pregnancy is also considered immune deficient. So if you're pregnant, your immune system is pregnant. Your immune system is actually suppressed because naturally, because you do have a fetus that it has different MHC than you, different blood type than you possibly. So in order for that fetus to develop properly, the woman's immune system is naturally suppressed. This is a look at SCID. So this is back to SCID, right? So I just want to talk about this one most famous case of SCID. So this David Vetter, his most famous SCID child lived all but 2 weeks in a plastic bubble. When he was 12, his doctor decided to attempt a bone marrow transplant to give him an immune system and leave his bubble. He's in a bubble because he can't be exposed to anything, right? He has no immune system. So anything, fungal spores, bacteria, just things that are completely harmless to us, because we have a healthy immune system, could kill David. So his sister donated bone marrow, but they did not know the bone marrow was contained a virus, a very common Epstein-Barr virus, which is oncogenic. Oncogenic means cancer-causing. And he developed a blood cancer, lymphoma, and he died shortly after it metastasized. So it's really sad for him. But yeah, if you do have SCID, a child born with SCID, would basically look for a bone marrow transplant to get a new stem cell and to pump out, the white blood cells of the immune system. Without the bone marrow transplant and hopefully getting that immune system, you have to be in a sterile environment, so bubbles. And then they're trying gene therapy, right? So trying to give the person the functional genes that they have mutations in. Okay, so this is him again. And there was a movie made by him, but this little guy, he had a suit built by NASA. Notice he has his own air circulation, right? The air carries a lot of pathogens. So poor guy had to be like that for almost all of his life. So lastly, we'll wrap up with immune system and cancer. The immune system does take care of precancerous cells in the body. Specifically, again, right, you guessed it, T cells, because they are responsible for detecting non-self, right? They're responsible for detecting abnormal markers on cells, and that cytotoxic T cells would kill them, right? So the T cells of your immune system play a large role in recognizing those cancer cells or precancerous cells and getting rid of them before they actually become a tumor. When a cell becomes cancerous, the surface of the tumor have something called tumor-associated antigens. So they start to express these weird antigens on the surface, and they tell the cytotoxic T cells it's non-self, so then we can go ahead and the cytotoxic T cells can kill them. Evidence that your immune system can prevent cancer is that cancer is also found in it's mostly found in older people where the immune systems are at least less efficient. And then we also have people who are immunocompromised. If you have AIDS or SCID, cancers are very, very common. So those are some examples of the immune system and cancer. And just a word, this picture got moved. So we do, there's a lot of work right now on vaccines and trying to prevent cancer using our own immune system. Okay, so what happens is The malignant tumors, so malignant tumors are ones that break off and they can travel around the body and they can infect another organ and start to grow a tumor in another organ. They can actively suppress the immune response. Some cancer cells, in some cancer cells, the immune system is themselves the cancer. So when we talk about lymphoma or leukemia, these are cancer of white blood cells. So that obviously is going to knock down the immune response. In other cancers, cancer cells can become resistant to apoptosis. So any cancer is a disease of genetic mutations. For some reason, the genetics of that cell to divide normally, to kill itself when it's called to kill itself, right? Apoptosis, there's mechanisms of your normal cells that can recognize if they are old, right? Those telomeres we talked about, if the telomeres become too short, they undergo apoptosis to prevent any more genetic destruction. So in cancer cells, all that machinery is gone. So they do not have the ability to recognize that they're sick, that your cancer cells don't recognize the ability to stop dividing. They don't recognize that they're infected, and they don't do apoptosis. And so this may occur through the expression of membrane proteins that shut off the cytotoxic T cells, or induce some other T cell, the regulatory T cells that can shut down the immune responses. So basically, once a cancer cell progresses, then it can become very resistant to your T cell and suppress the T cell function to get rid of them. They're working on vaccines to prevent cancer. So there's two kinds of vaccines. There are preventative vaccines and therapeutic vaccines. You probably have heard of some preventative vaccines like Gardasil, which is this picture here. What preventative vaccines do is they, like any vaccine, they give it to you to target a pathogen. In this case, they target pathogens known to be linked to cancer. So, for example, our human papillomavirus, HPV, that causes warts and can lead to cervical cancer and penile cancer. Gardasil is against this human papillomavirus. I think there's 3 or 4 strains, I can't remember, but there's different strains within that vaccine. And it's very, very efficient, very, very effective vaccine. Another pathogen is hepatitis B, another virus that is known to be linked to liver cancer. So if you're infected with Hep B or a human papillomavirus, right, if you have immunity against those viruses, then you can prevent them from getting infected, prevent yourself from getting infected, and prevent those cells from becoming cancerous. Therapeutic vaccines are still in trials, and they're basically wanting to, once you have the cancer, they want to teach your immune system to find the marker on those tumor cells that are specific to those tumor cells and then attack those markers. So tumor-specific antigens, that's what we want to make the vaccines against, and to alert your body that this is a new form of antigen that we need to attack. Because again, right here, right, we talked about how some cancers can actually suppress the T cells. So we're trying to initiate the T cells to recognize the cancer and kill specifically cancer cells. This is a picture of that cancer immunotherapy vaccine, right? So you have a patient who has cancer. They get that vaccine, and this vaccine would contain those markers on like those tumor-specific antigens, right? And so your vaccine comes into the blood or tissues, and then just like any other T cell activation, you have an antigen presentation. This can be dendritic cell, B cell, macrophage. It presents to the T cells, right? So you have activation of your CD4, CD8. Your T cells they become activated, and they're going to look for that tumor, right? So they're going to infiltrate the tumor. Then it's going to destroy, right? How do cytotoxic T cells destroy? They do the perforin and granzyme. This is blebbing, right? And then the tumor cells would die. When the tumor cells die, you have a little bit more antigen release into the bloodstream, which hopefully would get picked up by more antigen-presenting cells, and you can get more helpers, the more T cell activation. So this is what people are working on right now, and hopefully they are seeing promising results from this, and hopefully we'll have something in clinical use soon. And that's it for this chapter. So we have some test yourself questions. B cells are responsible for asthma, anaphylaxis, tuberculin reactions, A and B, right? Because tuberculin, remember, that was delayed, and delayed is a T cell mediated response. Theoretically, type blank blood can be donated to all people because it lacks what? So if you look at your choices, type O blood is going to be able to be donated to all those people because it doesn't have antigens on the surface. Production of IgE and degranulation of mast cells are involved in, an extra D on this one. That is an anaphylaxis, right? So IgE and allergy, anaphylaxis is the systemic form of allergy where atopy is the local. Contact dermatitis is caused by, all right, so derma should tell you it's skin, and it's going to be chemicals absorbed by the skin. Next one, in order for hemolytic disease of the newborn to be possible, the mother has to be Rh what? And the fetus is Rh what? So mother has to be Rh negative. The fetus has to have that foreign Rh on it. So this is the scenario for hemolytic disease to occur. If the mom's Rh positive, it's fine because the fetus can be Rh negative or positive. And since the mother recognizes Rh as a self-antigen, her immune system will not respond against a positive fetus. True or false, Graves' disease involves destruction of thyroid receptors. And this is actually false because we're not destroying them, we are attaching to them and overstimulating the thyroid gland. A rheumatoid factor is a complex of what and what, and which is deposited where? So remember our rheumatoid factor was IgM and IgG. And rheumatoid arthritis happens in the joints, and specifically synovial joints. Synovial joints are the joints like your knee, your elbow, anything that's freely moving, your fingers. So synovial joint, okay? And number 8, allergen causes B cells to secrete what kind of antibodies? This is a repeat, hopefully that was easy. And then true or false, T cells are responsible for graft rejections. What do you guys think? That's true. What is RhoGAM? So if you go back in lecture and talk about hemolytic disease of the newborn, RhoGAM is the preventive medicine that you would give the mom during her first pregnancy. And it is an anti-Rh antibody. Okay, so that's what it is an anti-serum of anti-Rh antibodies. So the antibodies in that serum recognize Rh. And when the mother gets this, you have this floating around in her system, remember? And so if the baby's blood cell with an Rh factor gets into the mom's immune system, this antibody will come and bind to it, right? Masking it so the mom's immune system never sees it. And the mom's immune system never gets sensitized. Asthma is a local reaction. Anaphylaxis is a systemic reaction. Multiple sclerosis is caused by T cell destruction of your Schwann cells, and those vaccinated with BCG vaccine will have a negative TB test. That's false. They're going to have a positive TB test. And that's it, guys.